Good morning. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, the Noongar people, and recognise their leaders, past, present and emerging. Unfortunately, our college principal, Mr Declan Tannum, is unavailable today, and he has asked me to pass on his sincere apologies. My name is Michael Williams, Deputy Principal of Curriculum here at the college. To the Most Reverend Timothy Costello, Archbishop of Perth. To the Most Reverend Donald Sproxton, Auxiliary Bishop of Perth. To Dr Edward Simons, Director of Governance and Administrative Services for Catholic Education Western Australia, here today representing Dr Tim McDonald, the Executive Director. To the staff and students from the 24 schools that are gathered here today from across the Archdiocese of Perth, a warm welcome to Arranmore Catholic College. It is our great pleasure to host you at our school for the Archbishops Forum for LifeLink Day. I trust that your experience here will be rewarding and you will learn more about the important role the LifeLink social service agencies play in assisting thousands of people throughout our community. Just a quick housekeeping note, the male bathrooms are at the front here on the right and the ladies' bathrooms are at the back over there near the entrance. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the Most Reverend Donald Sproxton, Auxiliary Bishop of Perth and Chairman of LifeLink, to begin the 2017 Forum. Thank you.
Well, good morning everyone. How are you all? Good? Good. So the Archbishop and I would sincerely like to thank Arranmore Catholic College for hosting our forum again today, and to thank Mike for his welcome and his address at the beginning. I'm delighted to advise that as well as being filmed this morning, this forum is also being live streamed for the first time ever. So everyone at the school, and especially the few schools unable to attend today, can share in this special event in support of LifeLink Day 2017. I'd like to acknowledge our special guest, Mrs. Diana Altieri, the team leader of Religious Education and Faith Formation Team at Catholic Education Western Australia. And a very special welcome to all of you here, representatives from 28 secondary schools from across the Archdiocese of Perth. We are delighted that you have made the time to join us this morning. So before we begin, I'd like to commence proceedings with prayer. This is a prayer for charity. God of mercy and compassion, we praise you for your goodness. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Fill us with the spirit of loving service as we recognise in those we meet the face of Jesus, your Son. Through the generous work of our LifeLink welfare agencies, may burdens be lifted from the shoulders of your people, and may they feel the warmth of your kindness and love. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So what is LifeLink? Why was it started? What does it do? And whom do we help? Many of these questions are answered in our Welcome to LifeLink video, which many of you have already seen. But if you haven't, I'd like to share a short edited version of this with you now.
Welcome everybody. LifeLink was established by the Archdiocese of Perth in 1994 as the unifying name under which the many welfare and social service agencies established or supported by the Church would be funded and promoted. A number of our agencies have served people in need within communities throughout Western Australia for more than 30 years and are well known. Organisations such as Centrecare, Identity WA and Centrecare Employment and Training. The Shopfront, Day Dawn and Emmaus community organisations were established more recently to meet emerging needs identified within the community. Each agency or service, funded or supported through LifeLink, represents an essential part of the Church's mission to reach out to those in need and, in doing so, express faith in a direct and tangible manner. As you all know, as Catholics, we believe that it is through service to others that we see and experience the true face of Jesus. Pope Francis expressed this when he said, "It is not only in what we believe and what we say, but in what we do, that we come to fully know and understand the message of love which Jesus brought to the world." Just as Jesus walked with and reached out to the poor, the lonely, the isolated and the abused, we too are called upon to give concrete expression to our faith through our active service to others. Through the wonderful work of our LifeLink agencies, we bear witness to and are a vital part of engaging with people who reach out to us for help. I hope you enjoy this informational video.
LifeLink is not a welfare organisation, it is the fundraising and promotional arm for the many welfare agencies and services established by the Archdiocese of Perth. LifeLink currently provides funding support to the following agencies and organisations established or supported by the Church: Catholic Ministry for people who are deaf or hearing impaired, Catholic Outreach, Centrecare Employment and Training, Centrecare Incorporated, Juraminda, Day Dawn Advocacy Centre, Emmanuel Centre, Emmaus Community, Identity WA, Samaritan Projects, The Shopfront.
Whilst it may not always be obvious, there are thousands of people who desperately need our help right here in Perth and throughout WA.
LifeLink Catholic caring agencies reach out to more than 34,000 Western Australian families and individuals in need each year by providing services and respite care to individuals, families and children with physical or intellectual disability, by offering safe refuge and assistance for women and children escaping domestic abuse or violence, providing emergency housing, skills training for the unemployed, food and support for the homeless, and caring homes for people battling mental health conditions.
The Shopfront started in 2001. I went to see Archbishop Hickey about the problem we had with all the homeless people and looking for help. And so he told me, why don't you go and start a Shopfront? So the Shopfront first is a drop-in centre, and they get lovely volunteers who are warm and welcoming to greet them. But it's also a referral. So also then if you're homeless or you're looking for assistance, the Shopfront networks with a wide group of people so that they can provide emergency assistance. For people who are in need. Last year, 25,000 people came through Shopfront. People can help by donating to Shopfront financially. Other people may say, look, we'd like to help with blankets or canned drives. So people can help in many ways, and all of it is really, really appreciated. Most recently of someone, a lady that we were able to help who needed some assistance for Christmas presents, and just seeing that family and the joy and the love that they experienced by receiving the gifts of Christmas presents. And then her children were so excited when I went to see them. Oh, she's come with gifts. And they asked me, please eat with us, please share with us. Thank you for the love you've shown us. And that to me is repeated again and again to all these people who come to receive a touch of love. I think it's really important to recognise the amazing work that all our parishes do to support Shopfront. Most of our volunteers come directly from the parishes. They give up their time to come and support those who are in need. And without the parishes and the support from our parishes, Shopfront would not be the warm, welcoming and caring place it is.
Emmaus started in 1996 when I was working in a crisis unit. People were coming into the crisis unit and were coming back to the crisis unit constantly. I prayed and asked the Lord to give us a property where we could have long-term independent community living. The benefits of community living are that people in the long term become family. Our mission statement is that every person created by God deserves to love and be loved, to be respected and to be taken seriously. This is what we strive for, especially with people who live with mental health issues. Our basis is the Jesus message. It's simple, yet radical. It's about love. If our community grows, it will be in love. It's not for profit, it's for the love of our brothers and sisters. If Emmaus didn't exist, I guess the people would be living in hostels. The difference between a hostel and Emmaus is a hostel is accommodation. We're here, it's a home, and that's what we're striving for anyway. If I had a message regarding how people should treat people with mental health issues, it's the same as treating someone with diabetes or cancer. So the message would be that we are all connected, we are all brothers and sisters, and love. Love is the message. I can't even tell you how strongly I feel and this community feels about this message. People can support us by supporting LifeLink because we're part of a web of agencies that help our brothers and sisters. And if people feel in their heart, how can I do this? And I want to do something here, support LifeLink because it does go straight to the source, believe me. And it has helped in so many ways here. And other agencies. I'm friends with other agencies and it helps many people.
Each year, LifeLink supported agencies deliver more than $50 million of professional programs, caring services, qualified personnel and resources for the benefit of the Western Australian community.
Thankfully, much of this funding is provided through mission. It's on LifeLink Day.
More information about LifeLink, photos, articles and teaching resources are now available on our new website. Please visit us at www.lifelink.com.au.
Thank you for taking the time to learn more about LifeLink and the work of our social service agencies. It's up to all of us to help make a difference. Let us reach out with generosity, with compassion and with love when someone asks us for help.
So we've heard in this video that LifeLink agencies reach out to help more than 34,000 Western Australians in need each year. Sometimes the message behind that number can get lost. So to put it into some perspective, 34,000 people is the equivalent to the entire populations of Mosman Park, Peppermint Grove, Cottesloe, North Fremantle, Fremantle, South Fremantle and Beaconsfield. So let's talk about LifeLink Day itself. The Archbishops' LifeLink Day initiative for Catholic schools started in 1998. The core objectives of the Archbishops' LifeLink Day for Schools initiative are to promote understanding of the Church's response to people in need within our community, to instil in Catholic students attending our archdiocesan schools a sense of responsibility for those less fortunate, to provide education and information of the work undertaken by the LifeLink social service agencies in helping many thousands of Western Australian families and individuals in need each year, and to encourage a practical demonstration of faith by asking students, teachers and schools to organise a special fundraising event for LifeLink Day, with the proceeds aiding people in real need within the community. Since its inception, LifeLink Day has been warmly embraced by our archdiocesan schools. We are indeed grateful for the enthusiastic support of Catholic Education Western Australia, and especially of all those principals, teachers and students throughout the Archdiocese. Secondary schools have held fetes, free dress days, sports carnivals, walkathons, dances, international food days, and all manner of fun events which have been highly successful fundraising activities. I'm delighted to report that collectively, Catholic primary and secondary schools have raised more than $1.7 million to support LifeLink Day. And every dollar has been directed to the service and care of people in need in the community. This is a remarkable achievement, and you are to be congratulated on your efforts, and I think you should give yourselves a round of applause. Well done. Last year, I'm delighted to say that our primary and secondary schools raised almost $120,000. Thank you very much. The Archbishop and I hope that this year you will once again join together and be as generous as you can to help our brothers and sisters in need. Whilst LifeLink Day is officially launched on Wednesday, the 7th of June this year, your school may undertake its fundraising activity anytime during the school year. To help you to celebrate and share LifeLink Day in your school, we will provide a number of resources. These will be uploaded to our LifeLink website during April. From the Secondary School Resources button on the home page, you will have access to 2 videos of our forum today, a 1-hour video of these presentations, and a 90-minute video of the Q&A session which will follow later this morning. These will be split into 2 by 45-minute sessions. Teachers will be able to access these in class to share with the students. PDF copies of the LifeLink Day poster. The posters have already been delivered to your school. Information on our LifeLink agencies with contact details. Samples of our LifeLink and LifeLink Day logos, should you wish to use them. Photos representing the work of our LifeLink agencies. And again, thank you so much for your time this morning. And sincere thanks for your continuing support of LifeLink Day. I hope you enjoy today's forum, and whatever fundraising event your school may hold this year, I wish you every success. Thank you very much. So it's my pleasure now to introduce and invite Archbishop Timothy Costello to present his key address.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to look out and see so many of you here. I did feel a bit sorry for those who probably got held up in traffic and turned up late, because they're the ones who always have to walk past everybody else and take the front seats that everybody else has left empty. So well done. Thanks for coming. I wanted to begin this morning by saying how pleased I am to be here with you. This address that I give each year to our secondary school students on the occasion of our LifeLink Day launch is really one of the highlights of my year. Many of you would know perhaps that before I became a bishop, I was a teacher and a secondary school teacher in a large Catholic boys' school in Melbourne for a number of years. So I've got a bit of a soft spot for secondary schools and certainly always enjoy being with you. So thanks for coming. When I was appointed as the Archbishop of Perth 5 years ago, I had to choose a motto which would go on my official crest. Like most of your schools, our Archdiocese also has a crest. And you can see the Archdiocesan crest and my official crest up there on the screen. The Archdiocesan crest has the Southern Cross, as you can see, and the Black Swan. And the Southern Cross, of course, represents both Australia and our Christian faith, and the Black Swan represents Western Australia. But as well as the official Archdiocesan crest, each Catholic bishop also has his own personal crest, which represents some of the things that he regards as important. And it also usually has a motto that goes underneath, which tries to say in just a few words what the bishop sees as being really at the heart of his ministry as a bishop. So my crest, as you can see on one side, also has the Southern Cross and the Black Swan, because I am the Archbishop of Perth, but it also has on the other side a star, which represents Mary, the mother of Jesus, who's often described as the Star of the Sea. It has a cluster of 3 trees, which actually represent the founder of the religious order to which I belong, St. John Bosco, because the name Bosco, or the word Bosco in Italian, stands for wood, or means wood or forest. And then it has 3 diamonds, because like most Irish families, our family has a crest, and on that crest you'll find 3 diamonds. I don't know what they represent, but anyway, they're there, and to me they remind me of my family origins. The motto underneath is in Latin. I don't know how many of you are studying Latin at school, probably not too many of you, but you might know these 3 words at least: via, veritas, and vita. Via means the way, veritas means the truth, and vita means life. And these, of course, are 3 words that Jesus used on one occasion to describe himself. In choosing them as my motto, I wanted to express my conviction that being a Christian, and most of us are Christians, and most of us within that belong to the Catholic tradition, being a Christian, a Catholic Christian, and certainly being a priest or a bishop, doesn't make any sense at all. It has no sort of inner coherence to it unless Jesus is at the heart of everything that we're trying to do and everything that we're trying to be. So I chose that motto to remind myself, first of all, and then everybody else, of the fact that Jesus needs to be at the heart of what we're all on about. Like most of you, I can't say that I live up to this all the time, but I can say that I know that I'm supposed to keep trying if I'm going to be true to myself and true to the person that I think God has created me to be. There is another crest of which I'm rather fond that's going to come up on the screen now. When I was first preparing this address in the week before Easter, I was riding high. Some of you may know, you may have heard on the grapevine, that I'm a Richmond supporter, and for the first time in a long time, my team at that stage had won the first 3 games of the season in a row. We were sitting second on the ladder, and in typical Tigerland fashion, we were already making room for the 2017 Premiership Cup in the trophy room at the Punt Road Oval. Not only that, but we had at that stage already beaten the Eagles. I'm never too sure whether I'm happier when we beat the Eagles or when we beat the Dockers, but I do know that Richmond supporters are never happier than when we beat Collingwood. You know, of course, that in Melbourne anyway, there's a phrase about ABC, It's not the beginning of the alphabet, it stands for anyone but Collingwood. So I hope there are no Collingwood supporters here. This week I'm not so happy, of course, but we won't go into that. We'll leave that for another time. Like all teams, Richmond has its heroes. On the Monday after the win over the Eagles, the papers were full of stories about Dustin Martin, Jack Riewoldt, Daniel Rioli, Trent Cotchin, and a whole pile of others. These young men, and so many others found in every AFL team, while none of them probably is perfect as a human being, nevertheless always display great qualities like self-discipline and courage and commitment and loyalty. And without those qualities, none of the undoubted natural talent that they all have would get them very far in the cutthroat world of professional football. You need more than talent. You need other things going for you as well. It's not only football or sport in general which produces great heroes, people to whom we look up, people we admire, people we would like to emulate. Such people are found in every walk of life, including our own church. And this morning I wanted to speak about one such hero whose name would be known to most of you, although you may not know a great deal about this person other than that she is Australia's first saint. I'm talking, of course, about Mary MacKillop, or Mary of the Cross, St. Mary of the Cross, as she's officially known. This morning I don't intend to spend a lot of time retelling her life story to you. You can easily find that on the internet, and if you don't know a great deal about her, I would encourage you to research her life when you get the opportunity. This morning, it's probably enough simply to know that she was born in Melbourne in 1842. She died in Sydney in 1909 at the age of 67, and she's buried in the chapel of the convent that she started in North Sydney, just a short trip over the Harbour Bridge from the city itself. She started work at the age of 14 in a stationery shop in Melbourne. And then she became governess to the children of her aunt and uncle, who lived in a little place called Penola in South Australia. So as a governess, of course, she started teaching these children, and she also started teaching other children who lived nearby. And eventually, and this is where you need to check it on the internet, it's a long and complicated story, but eventually, by teaming up with a local priest who was very concerned about the lack of educational opportunities, especially for families living in the Australian outback, she gathered around her a group of young women who were the first members of what we now know as the Sisters of St. Joseph, or the Josephites. What started as a small group of women dedicated to the care of young people grew into a very large congregation of nuns, of sisters. And there are still many hundreds of these sisters living and working here in Australia and in a number of other countries around the world. As Mary's little group started to grow, she realised that it was up to her to provide them with the leadership they needed if they were going to be able to stay faithful to the difficult work and the challenging lifestyle that they had taken on. So just as AFL footballers have to have discipline and commitment and loyalty and determination, so too did these young women, these young sisters. Mary rose to the challenge, and in doing so, she became not just the first woman to take on the lifestyle herself, but the one who would set the pattern for all the others to follow. A bit like an AFL coach, Mary had to provide inspiration, an example, and advice. And it's some of that advice, some of Mary's advice, that I wanted to offer you this morning as we launch this year's LifeLink effort. The first piece of advice is a saying of Mary MacKillop's which has become very famous. In fact, if you're ever in Sydney and you get a chance to visit the chapel where she is buried, you will find this piece of advice on large banners which hang in the chapel for all to see. It's a very simple piece of advice. Some of you may have heard me talk about it before. It's also a very challenging piece of advice, and this is it. Never see a need without doing something about it. Never see a need without doing something about it. It seems to me that this might be a perfect description of generosity and selflessness. A person who has these qualities is precisely a person who lives by the same spirit which animated Mary MacKillop, and the same spirit which makes this one of her most important pieces of advice to those young women she gathered around her. Not only is this a highly idealistic goal for someone to try and reach, and it is, but it also represents a very practical, down-to-earth method for living what we might call a heroic life. In our Catholic tradition, one of the reasons why someone gets canonised as a saint is because they are judged to have lived an heroic life. Living this way is living as a hero. But of course, it's not as simple as it sounds. Because it's one thing to suggest to another person that he or she should try and live like this. It's another thing to provide suggestions as to how to actually achieve it day by day. After all, such an approach to life presupposes a number of very important ideas. Firstly, it presumes that a person will have eyes that are open and on the lookout for people in need. Eyes that are open. And I think we know that not everybody has these kinds of eyes, or at least uses these kinds of eyes in their lives. I think we could expand that a little bit further and suggest that a person is likely to succeed in doing what Mary MacKillop suggests only if she or he has ears that are tuned in to all the different ways in which people call out for help. It's not always obvious that people are in need of help or calling out for help. We have to be tuned in. And sometimes we fill our lives with so much other noise and distraction that we're very unlikely to even hear these often well-disguised cries for help. And even more, and this I think takes us to the very centre of LifeLink Day, even more, if we think about it, we quickly realise that unless you have a heart that actually wants to help, unless, in other words, you are already trying to be a generous and selfless person, at least to some extent, it's unlikely that it will even occur to you that you should reach out to help people in need. And then I think if we start to think our way into this a little more deeply, the questions begin to surface. How do people's hearts get reshaped so that they want to help? How do people get to have sensitive ears and wide open eyes so that they actually begin to notice how much people are in desperate need? How easy really is it to do something about helping them? These are important questions. They remind me of a famous story that Jesus once told in one of his parables. You will have heard it before. I'm just going to read it, but it will come back to you, I'm sure. It's known generally as the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. It's up there on the screen for you to follow. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead." We could spend a lot of time reflecting on this story, but for today, I really just want to point out one thing. The rich man, at least as far as the gospel story tells us, was not a bad or evil or cruel man. He didn't kick Lazarus every time he walked past him. He didn't set the dogs onto him. He didn't call the police to come and arrest him for loitering and begging. The rich man wasn't bad or evil or cruel. He was just insensitive. He was blind to the fact that someone he went past every day was suffering, and he was blind too to the fact that he, the rich man, if he wanted to, could easily have done something about it. But he didn't. He didn't have the eyes, and he didn't have the ears, and he didn't have the heart that I was talking about a little bit earlier. He wasn't able to see the need that was actually staring him in the face, and much less was he willing to do anything about it. He might have been a rich and successful man, but in the ways that really count, he was anything but a hero. I suspect that many of us know people like this rich man. It may even be that there is just a little bit of the rich man in us as well. It might be worth our while to reflect for a moment on whether or not there might be a whole lot of Lazaruses that we pass by each day without really noticing it. Maybe on our way to and from school, or on our way to the footy, or when we go into the city on the weekends. It might even be that there are some Lazaruses, some lonely or neglected or silently suffering people at school, or next door, or down the street from us. Do we even know? Have we got eyes that see these people, or ears that hear them calling for help, or hearts that ache a little when we do see and hear them? All of this leads me to a second piece of advice that Mary MacKillop used to give that first group of young women, that first group of sisters. It's not as famous, it's not as well known as the first one, but it is at least as important, and maybe even more so. And this is the advice she used to also give her sisters. Remember who you are trying to follow. Remember who you are trying to follow. It seems to me that Mary could only give her sisters the first piece of advice, never see a need without doing something about it, because she knew that while on their own they would never be able to live up to that piece of advice, they would be able to if they kept their eyes on the person they were following, Jesus. And why is that so important? I think it's because in following Jesus, Mary and her sisters, and in fact every Christian, was not and is not simply following a man who died 2,000 years ago and who left us a great example to imitate. Just having an example to imitate on its own is never going to be enough. Mary and her sisters, and every Christian, and hopefully that includes most, if not all of us, are following someone who we know is alive today, who certainly does call each and every one of us to great things, to be heroes, but who also promises to be with us, to help us, to strengthen us, to pick us up when we fall over, when we get things wrong, and who says to us, as he so often said during his lifetime to his disciples, "Do not be afraid. I am with you. Have courage." A big number of us here this morning are Catholics. We've been baptised and confirmed. And many years ago, we would have made our first communion. In all of these ways, Jesus has been stepping into our lives, uniting us with him, lending us his strength, his spirit, so that we can all realise the potential we have and become the people that God has created us to be. There is, I think, a very real sense in which over all of these years, he has been gradually forming in us eyes that can see the needs of others, ears that can hear their cries for help, and hearts that do ache and want to reach out and do what we can to make people's lives better. But that's not true just for the majority of us who are Catholics. There are people here who aren't Catholics, who don't go to Holy Communion when you go to Mass, but that doesn't mean that God still isn't very much working in your lives, if you let him, to shape you into the people he has created you to be. One of the basic things we believe as Christians is that Jesus wants to be a brother to every human person. We believe that his Spirit is at work in the Catholic Church, but not confined to the Catholic Church. No one is excluded from God's love. Everyone has a place in God's heart. So what I wanted to say to you this morning is that you do already have the eyes you need, but you may have to take off the blinkers that are limiting your vision. You do already have the ears that you need, but you just might have to disconnect your iPhones from time to time and take off your headphones occasionally so that you can hear what is going on around you. You do already have the hearts that you need, but you might have to make a bit of an effort to get in touch with what lies deepest in your heart. Not just the surface stuff, but what lies deepest. One of the reasons we hold this annual forum each year is that it gives me a chance to speak to the young leaders of our schools and ask you to be at the centre of your school's engagement with LifeLink. To be the people who help the rest of the school community discover that they already have those eyes and those ears and those hearts. Over the years, different schools have done different things to raise awareness of the needs of so many people in our society and to raise money to help the church agencies we heard about a little earlier respond to these needs. I have to be honest and admit that I'm not particularly creative myself, so I'm probably not the one to come up with innovative and original suggestions as to how you can go about both tasks, raising awareness and raising money. After the break, we'll have a Q&A, and we've got two very creative people here, Dr. Simons and Bishop Sproxton, who might have some great ideas, so feel free to ask them. Nothing like putting people on the spot. LifeLink is about raising money, but it's also about raising awareness. LifeLink in your school is about raising money, but it's also about raising awareness. There are too many people who, like the rich man in Jesus' parable, just don't see the suffering, the loneliness, the desperation, and the hopelessness which have taken hold of the lives of so many people, including so many young people. What I'm hoping is that you can go back to your schools today with a real sense of enthusiasm, of energy, of determination, and maybe even of urgency, ready to do whatever you can, together with all those other people you can gather around you, to really fire up the whole school community so that no one can say that your school is a place full of people like the rich man in today's story. Instead, what I'm hoping is that people will say of your school community, there's a school that doesn't just talk about social justice or care for the poor or sticking up for the underdog. There's a school which is full of people who are ready to roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty and make a difference. I think a famous poem of Saint Teresa of Avila, another great hero in the Christian story, a poem that she wrote expresses all of this really well. Many of you will be aware of it, but you might like to use it as a reflection when you gather people around you to get LifeLink going in your own school community. So let me read it for you and just think about what it's trying to say. Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes through which his compassion looks out upon the world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. Today, in the spirit of this very beautiful poem of St. Teresa, I really want to ask you to make use of all you have and all you are, and in a sense, all that deep down you most want to be, to play your part in this year's LifeLink effort. I've got a few other more practical points to make, but just wanted to finish there the official address and to say thank you for your attention and for listening. Before I do close, as some of you would be aware, it is traditional during this launch each year that I announce which school or schools will receive the Archbishop's Spirit Award for the previous year's LifeLink Day. It's important to remember that this award is not based on how much money is raised through fundraising. So it's not called the Economic Award or anything like that, it's called the Spirit Award. It's about the spirit that operates in the school. So it's presented to the school which comprehensively demonstrates active support for the LifeLink Day initiative, which embraces the goals of LifeLink That is, to not only learn about the Church's response to people in need within our Archdiocese, but to also undertake some form of fundraising in support of the social service agencies funded through LifeLink. A school which commits to educating students on their responsibility to care for those less fortunate in our community, and a school which promotes an ethos of caring and compassion for students, for teachers, for parents, and for the wider community. We all have a responsibility to show love and compassion to all of these groups, not just on LifeLink Day, but every day. On the screen now you'll see the list of schools which have received my Spirit Award since it was last presented in 1999. I'm not going to read them all out, and they move relatively slowly, I think, so you can have a read of them as I'm talking. The truth is that each and every school is deserving of receiving this award because all of our schools demonstrate enthusiastic and generous support for LifeLink Day. However, in presenting the Spirit Award each year, Bishop Don and I try to acknowledge those who, as far as we can tell, have made an extra effort, been especially creative, or gone that extra mile to help people in need. We say it every year, because it's true every year, that the task is always a difficult one. It's not an easy decision. So before I announce the winner, I want to make special mention of 6 schools which, as far as Bishop Don and I could tell, really did embrace the educational aspects of LifeLink Day and organised innovative and enjoyable fundraising events. I'll read them all through, the 6 of them. We might hold our applause till I've read through the 6 names. So my thanks to all of those people at Seton Catholic College in Samson, at John the 23rd College in Mount Claremont, at Emmanuel Catholic College down there in Success, at Padbury Catholic Primary School in Padbury, at Magella Catholic Primary School in Balga, and at Loreto Primary School in Nedlands. But I am delighted to announce that Bishop Don and I have once again selected not one, but 2 schools, one a primary school and one a secondary school, as joint winners of the Archbishops Award for 2016. So just to keep the tension going, I'll announce the primary school winner first. That's St Helena's Catholic Primary School in Allenbrook. I think there are some people from Holy Cross here, so your younger brothers and sisters have taken out the award this year. Well done. And the winner of the Archbishop's Spirit Award for 2016 is Mercy College in Kundula. So congratulations, well done. They're up here in the front looking pretty pleased with themselves, so congratulations, that's terrific. Bishop Sproxton, Bishop Don and I have asked all of you to enthusiastically support our LifeLink Day initiative. We're hoping to raise a minimum of $130,000 for people in need in our community. So I'm really very delighted to officially launch LifeLink Day 2017 and to finish this part of the morning just by asking the Lord to bless us all and to be with us as we all try to develop those eyes and those ears and those hearts, without which we won't be able to be the people that God is calling us to be. So may Almighty God bless all of you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I now want to invite Dr. Ed Simons, who is the Director of Governance and Administrative Services at Catholic Education Western Australia. Dr. Simons is representing Dr. MacDonald, so I invite Dr. Ed Simons to come now to the microphone.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Archbishop and Bishop Don. It's my pleasure to be with you here this morning, and as the Archbishop has just mentioned, representing our Executive Director, Dr. Tim MacDonald, who's currently over in Sydney. And may I begin by acknowledging the land on which we're gathering, its traditional owners, the Noongar Whadjuk people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future elders, many of which are in our Catholic schools and colleges on this very day. And seeing so many of you here today to support the launch of this year's LifeLink campaign is wonderful. And I want to thank you for joining together, and especially thank those people who are still working away, making sure that the sizable logistics of an event like this are actually possible. So thank you to those people who have pulled such an important and sizable event together. Notable occasions such as today help to reaffirm my sense of pride to be a part of our system of 163 Catholic schools and colleges right across the state, and a system that I think we would agree is full of generosity and sense of care and support for others. And many congratulations to Mercy College on the announcement today. Thank you, Archbishop Costello and Bishop Don, for sharing your insightful words and for challenging those of us here today this morning, both staff and students, to roll up our sleeves and lead our school communities as we live out the gospel. The LifeLink campaign launch provides us with a powerful call to action, which demands both our personal and collective responsibility and accountability. And as students and staff within Catholic schools, we are now tasked with taking up this important challenge. And one way which we can frame this task is through the Catholic education strategy of LEAD. And this has 4 focus areas which stand for learning, engagement, accountability, and discipleship. And it perhaps goes without saying that supporting LifeLink, as we've already heard clearly this morning, is a clear example of discipleship, both at an individual level and at our collective school level. Yet, I believe that the support for LifeLink encompasses the whole acronym of LEAD. Efforts aligned to support LifeLink awaken the fact that the learning that takes place in Catholic schools and colleges is not simply about pursuing intellectual, creative, sporting or social opportunities. Instead, it has learning and understanding about serving God and serving others at its core. Indeed, learning about both the cause of disadvantage and the ways in which we can collectively respond to it is fundamental to the ongoing success of both LifeLink and Catholic schools. In the LEAD acronym, E stands for engagement, and we are all called today to truly engage with the reality of inequality experienced by our neighbours and engage our friends and our families in meaningful dialogue about the need for social action. And A in LEAD stands for accountability. Being accountable with the resources that we have, the precious time that we have, and our responsibility to act for the good of those who need our help and assistance the most. I hope that today we can each learn something new about the important work of the LifeLink agencies, and I already have, and allow ourselves to be inspired to support their efforts to serve the disadvantaged and marginalised within our society. I know that all our schools have the creativity, the compassion and the skills needed to make meaningful contribution to the work of LifeLink agencies through the activities, fundraising and awareness that we have heard of already. And I believe collectively we should be proud of how Catholic schools and colleges have supported LifeLink in recent years. And I am now excited to see how we will continue to do so throughout this year and into the future. So good luck and thank you.
My name's Takesha. I'm from Catholic Agriculture Bindoon. And my question is, how do we get more people involved in doing stuff for helping the community?
Would you like to answer?
Anyone.
Anybody got any thoughts?
Could just have a go. It's very difficult, I think, at times when you come up with a great idea to be able to bring people with you to put that idea into practice. And so therefore I think it's very important to be able to talk to that group in the school who does that sort of work, you know, already. So you might have already a little committee in the school of students and teachers who help coordinate those sorts of things. And it's good to put your idea to them, and they then can sort of make that idea something that's quite practical and something that can be done. So I think that's always the first step. And then that can also, it certainly does mean that others are involved in the process of developing the idea, and then more and more people sort of hear about it, become engaged with that idea, and then we'll make it work. So I think that's the way to do it, because it is very hard to have a great idea and then you go off and try and put it into practice, but without that support of others, perhaps it doesn't work so well.
It was Takesha, wasn't it? That good question, Takesha. I think what I'd add to Bishop Don's answer is I think it has to come from within. I think we can probably ask and suggest and recommend to people as much as we want them to do something, but ultimately it's got to come, you know, a decision that they have to make personally. Perhaps to illustrate that, I met an amazing young guy the other day, and he and I were speaking about the power of schooling and education and how it can transform lives. And this young boy who's close to leaving school was telling me about his upbringing and some of the challenges that he had to overcome. He lived not far from here and was brought up by his mother, who he spoke of so lovingly and fondly. And for one reason or another, and obviously because of significant challenge, it wasn't that uncommon that they had to sleep rough, his mother and him, when he was growing up, sometimes on park benches, sometimes under bridges. And one of the remarkable things about this young boy was how he said to me that his mum used to turn to him at night, as you know, they were curled up somewhere and trying to get to sleep, and looked at him and said, don't ever forget how fortunate you are and how fortunate you are compared to others in our world. And that was a very powerful story for me, because it affirmed the fact that whoever we are and wherever we are, there are opportunities for us to give back and to help others. So that was very much the way this young guy was living his life, by giving back. So I think in short, we can ask and tell and suggest and recommend and promote, and rightly we should, but ultimately it has to come from within for us to make our decision whether we want to give and how we give.
And I maybe would just add one thought, and that is, hopefully from today everybody will go back enthusiastic and keen to start things up. And it could be a bit easy to get discouraged because you guys are here, you're part of it. You might have a bit more enthusiasm and energy than a lot of the other people at school. So I'd say just be aware of that so that you don't let yourself get discouraged if it doesn't take off as quickly as you wanted it to, or it's a bit harder work than you expected it to be. I think there's always a challenge. We face it in every area of our lives, and that is how to hold together, having these really high ideals. You know, we really want to achieve something, but we've also got to be realistic and think, I can't afford to let myself get discouraged because it's going to take a while for other people to catch on. So try and hold together that idealism, you know, that real enthusiasm and a desire to do something, but also be realistic and know that it's going to take a bit of time, and don't let yourself get discouraged. I think that's also an important part of it.
Thanks.
My name is Liam Clark and I'm from St Joseph's School Northern. What are some ideas that you have for fundraising for LifeLink?
I can begin to answer that by saying that during my little talk I said I wasn't the one to ask, so I'll pass over to Bishop Don and Dr. Ed.
In the little presentation that I gave at the beginning, there were some examples that I quoted that I'm aware of that schools have used, and they've been very successful. So the old thing of having a fete has been tried and has been successful. Having dances, having fun days at school where you as you know, you go dressed as you in casual wear, and you then raise money in that regard. But there could be other ways in which you could explore, which could be like having an international dinner. Now, in most of our schools now, the population of our schools is very multicultural, so there is the opportunity for people to share something of their culture through sharing food. There's a very powerful, very strong way of people appreciating that we come from different traditions, different cultures, and the food, in a sense, can represent that. So that can be a fun way of doing it. I used to do it when I was a parish priest. We used to have international food days where we would have people prepare the food. People would come and taste it and enjoy it, and then we'd sell them the recipe. And that meant that they could take it home. And I asked the people who provided the recipes not to leave anything out, because sometimes Mum says, no, I don't want it to be quite the same as mine. So it was sometimes a bit different. But that was really a wonderful way of people in our parish just to get to know the diversity that existed in the parish. There were 60 nationalities in my parish of Mirrabooka. And it was a fantastic community because of that, very strong community of faith, but made stronger, I think, because people came to accept one another through events like that. So that's just another example. And as I was saying before, if you do have a little committee that organises LifeLink within the school, you'll be amazed at the sorts of ideas that can come up from people in those committees as well. And if you think it's going to go well, run with it. Yeah. And that will add to the list of things I can say next year. So thank you.
It's a good question, and it's tough. You know, it's hard, and I'm sure we've got lots of enthusiastic people here in the room who are keen to think of the new thing. One thing I would love to do is, if you've come up with a great idea, then share it with other schools and colleges, so that we're not all trying to reinvent the wheel each time. We have the same challenge in the office as adults. You know, we find ways, or forever trying to find ways to support Catholic agencies and LifeLink. And recently, a group of my colleagues have got together and decided to go out and buy some food and cook some meals and deliver it to shopfront on a fortnightly basis. And as the Archbishop and the Bishop has alluded to already today, I think it's about coming together. It's about finding an activity that is engaging and can pull people together to have conversations and have some fun. And there's absolutely nothing wrong. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. But being clear what the objective is and doing what you can. So it's tough. I'm sure there'll be some fantastic ideas in this room. It would be great to get some suggestions from some of the other tables, because you've got the experts down there rather than up here. You're the guys that are thinking and doing it every day and have been so successful to date. So you've heard of some examples, but if you can find ways, suggestions from some of the other tables, because you've got the experts down there rather than up here. You're the guys that are thinking and doing it every day and have been so successful to date. So you've heard of some examples, but if you can find ways to connect schools together to join that conversation, then that would be wonderful.
I do think too that it's a good idea to try and come up with ideas that are fun. So I remember this probably won't sound like fun to some of you, but when I was in Year 12 myself, the school that I went to, pardon me, the school footy oval, the retaining wall had kind of started to decay, and this oval was in danger of kind of disappearing with every new rainfall. And so a couple of us got the idea of organising a walkathon, and we raised a fair bit of money, and we were able to buy a whole lot of bluestone blocks that were used to build a retaining wall for the school oval, which is still there. I won't tell you how many years later, but a long time ago. I realise that there are sort of safety issues around some of these things. We could do things in those days that aren't so easy to do now. I'm not sure whether you'd get away with a walkathon. There might be all sorts of health and safety issues, but there are all sorts of other thons that you can have, a spellathon or a kickathon or a danceathon, or there might be heaps of those sorts of things that are a lot of fun and get people kind of really engaged but can raise some money at the same time. So that's just another suggestion.
Hello, my name is Aidan from Prendeville Catholic College, and this question is to all three of you. So the work you do is very amazing and you're helping so many people, but I find that the message that I find that a lot of people don't actually know about LifeLink, and that there's a lot of potential that people want to join in and have an activity, whereas where they cannot actually do this because they're not aware of it. So how is it possible that we, as a community, can spread the word of LifeLink to other members, not necessarily church communities, but just anybody, like at IGA or something? You can just like put up posters or something so that they can be compelled to go towards this community and give, and then therefore you'll raise more money and help more people. So how could we do this? Thank you very much.
Good question.
Yeah, there's a famous marketing phrase. I say famous, I think I'm about to get it wrong, but Simone will correct me at the back. I think you have to share the same message 7 times before it actually connects with someone, and this is why you see the big brands, running advertising campaigns and saying the same, slogans and taglines all the time. So I think it is about repeat messaging and trying to connect with as many people with simple and clear clarity as to what LifeLink is and what it's trying to achieve. So one of the greatest attributes for that is the people here in the room and your predecessors last year and the year before. I think we all have responsibility, having sat here this morning, to have a conversation with at least one person, and ideally at home when we get there this afternoon, this evening, and with some friends and with some mates at school. So I think having a conversation can go a huge way. Which is not to say that there needs to be big launch events like this, and it's wonderful that this is being streamed live on the internet, and a video will be available, and obviously that there's material that's already been brought together. But I'm a firm believer in the personal message, and just as your question was very articulate and clear, hopefully you're now in a position to have a conversation with people and to begin to spread that word. So I guess one call to action is, how many of us here can have a conversation today, or several conversations, and begin to spread the awareness?
If I might as well, as the manager of LifeLink, thank you for that question, Prendeville. That's, I guess, our goal. And this is the embryonic start of this forum, what we hope to get from it. What I would love to do, we've had a lot of, as well as being the LifeLink manager, I'm the marketing and media manager for the Archdiocese, for Archbishop Costello. And as the Archbishop will tell you, and you can tell from the bags under my eyes, there's a lot of work. And there's a lot of things that we'd love to focus on, and one of those is exactly the topic that you've raised. What I would love to see in the future come from these forums, from LifeLink Day and from your question, is that we put together a small group of some of our really keen and enthusiastic director of ministries, some students like yourself, student leaders from a number of our colleges, and to discuss this idea. We'd like this to be driven from you. LifeLink agencies, they're like the BP of charities. It's why the Archbishop started LifeLink. No, all of our agencies have different names. No one knew who they were or what they did. They just went about their business of service. Some of them have been serving the community for nearly 40 years. We think it's a great message. We think it is the good news, and we think it is something that's worthy of being promoted, and we would certainly love to get that out. So when the Archbishop gets back from the Bishops' Conference, I'll make a time and we'll sit, and hopefully during this year we can plan to put together this little think tank, this group, invite some of you to participate, and then from that group, the circles, the pebble in the pond, let it ripple out from there. So thank you. If you're happy with that, Archbishop?
Absolutely. I had another suggestion that you might think about, because each one of your schools, I hope, will get engaged with LifeLink and will start to do things. And you're actually a pretty important presence in your own local communities. Most schools, I think, would have people like a business manager or a community engagement liaison person or something like that. I'd suggest that once you've come up with some ideas, get someone from the school, maybe you yourselves, to contact the local paper and see whether or not they might be interested in coming out and seeing what the school's doing, getting a couple of photos, getting it into the local press. It's not always easy to do this at the level of, say, the West Australian or something like that, but in the local newspapers, I think they're often looking for community stories, and that would be a way in which the word gets spread around, because you can't have the story unless you talk about why you're doing what you're doing. So it's just one possibility. I think most schools will have someone who would have contacts with the local press who could perhaps create that link, and that's a good way, I think, of getting it into the local community and then helping the school to get support for its fundraising activities as well. So just another suggestion.
Brendan Hinchliffe from Sydney Catholic College. First off, for Archbishop Costello, I'm a passionate Richmond supporter myself, so glad to see you there. But also, as with exams and stuff coming up, there's a lot of stress and anxiety put on teenagers, and so obviously mental health is a very big problem. How can we, as a community, help raise awareness and help people who are suffering from it?
Gosh, look, that's a very important question. And I think every one of you would know that in your own school community there are people who are struggling. You know, we hear a lot, for example, about kids who really find Year 12 stressful. Some don't, but some do. There are sort of layers to this, I reckon, and it's partly what I was talking about in my address. Particularly when it's mental health issues, people are often reluctant to talk about it. And so someone else needs to have his or her eyes open for this sort of stuff. There's a movement around, I can't remember, many of you will know what I'm talking about, but a movement that kind of encourages people to ask the question, how are you going? Is everything okay? There's a special movement, some of you may know what it is. The Are You Okay thing. It goes back, I think, to what I was saying before. In the local school community, in your school, there needs to be people, and not just the staff, hopefully they're onto this as well, but also you yourselves, who just have eyes that are on the lookout for people. If there's someone who's always sitting on their own during recess or lunchtime, has no one to talk to, doesn't seem to want to engage with anybody, it might be that they're just shy, it might be they're having a bad day, but it might be something more. So I think it's partly developing that sensitivity and then doing something about it, the Mary MacKillop thing. Don't see a need and then ignore it. Now, you've got to be careful, because you can intrude in the wrong ways and make things worse. But I do think it begins with that. It's exactly what I was talking about. Eyes that are open and on the lookout. So you're actually not thinking so much about yourself all the time, but you come to school thinking, I better keep my eyes open in case there's someone who could do with a friendly word or helping hand or something. And ears that are kind of tuned in, not necessarily to the loud cry that everyone can hear, but maybe the silent cry that no one can hear. So I think it's partly about awareness. Now, you're obviously aware, and I think most of us are aware, that we live in a society that is, full of really good things, but it also seems to be full of pressures and stresses and tensions that some people really struggle with. So I think the very fact that we're conscious of it and that we want to do something about it, and that we belong to a community, a school community, where there are people, I'm sure there would be in every school, people who have some skill in dealing with this stuff, but you might only have 2 or 3 people in that school. They may not always be aware of everything that's going on. And so it really falls to so many of us to just keep our eyes open and know who to go to. If you don't feel you can approach the person himself or herself, you might think, well, do we have a school counsellor? Would the principal be interested? Should I let the parish priest know? Are there ways in which we can find a pathway to reach out to these people? I think that would be my first suggestion. try and develop and help each other to develop that sensitivity to this issue, and then don't just sit back and hope everything works out. Talk to someone about, Joe doesn't seem to be very happy. He's been down in the dumps for the last week. I'm not going to ask him myself if everything's okay, but maybe someone needs to. So you go to a teacher or someone you trust and you raise it with them. So I think that "are you okay" idea is already a good start. So that would be my response, but the others might want to add something to that.
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question, and many of you might be aware of the current publicity it's getting through a program on Netflix, which some of you may be aware of it, which speaks to young people and mental health. It's a sensitive topic. My personal beliefs on it are that we will all have mental health issues as we walk through our lives, and I don't think we're necessarily equipped with knowing how to deal with them ourselves. If I have a headache, I know that I'd probably take a tablet. If I was unlucky enough to break my leg, I know I'd be in hospital and putting it in a cast. I think we as humans, for some reason, find it harder to know what to do and how to act when something a bit wrong is going on in our heads. For some people, and hopefully for most, that might be for a short period of time. But let's be clear, for some people, schools are very difficult places, and they can be challenging places for a long period of time. And I think that's why we're collectively responsible as students, but most importantly as adults, to make children's experiences in schools and where possible outside schools as appropriate and as content as possible. I think, building on what the Archbishop has said, the need to speak, and wherever and however possible, I would encourage students to speak to an adult, and that's not necessarily because that particular adult might have the answer or be best qualified to provide the right advice, but it's possible they might know where to go and seek that professional support. So have the conversation, look out for each other, accept that whatever we as individuals are feeling from one point in time to another, we all have ups and downs. We hope that those downs are short-lived, but sometimes they're not. And I would hope that in every one of our schools and colleges, students are clear who they can go to speak to and where professional support is available. So the need to be open and have the conversation is my clear point of advice there.
So I'm Anne, and I'm from Mercy College. So one of the projects our school did was the SH project, where we did not talk for 24 hours and communicated through whiteboards to our teachers and our students. So I was just wondering, and we gained sponsors by doing this. So I was wondering, how do you choose what agencies get the money we raised?
Raises, I think, the question of what is LifeLink itself and what does it do. LifeLink is the group of people that we've brought together who help us in promoting the fundraising for those agencies that we mentioned in our presentations. So the money that we are able to raise through the schools and through the parishes, and even through some private donations, some very generous donations are given to us as well. That then is allocated to those agencies that we've mentioned. It seems to us to be the best way of giving to those agencies what they really need for that next 12 months. And of course, the more that we are able to get in, the more we're able to disperse to those agencies. So that's normally the way we go about it. We wouldn't just specifically say, well, we'll get this school to fundraise for this particular agency, but for the whole group. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Can I just comment on the being quiet for 24 hours and writing everything on a whiteboard? Wow. I'll be in some meetings this afternoon, and I'm going to try and adopt that in those meetings as well. Great idea, and it comes to the earlier question about what we could do. Some brilliant ideas, so congratulations on that as an idea.
My name is Samantha Dew, and I'm from St Bridget's College, and this is to Bishop Don and Archbishop Timothy. And if God wants us to have children and a family, why does being a priest, nun, bishop or an archbishop restrict that?
Oh, thank you very much. Look, it's a really good question, and it could take me all day to answer it. I'll just make a couple of points. It's certainly true that in part of the Catholic world, priests and bishops are not allowed to get married. It's not universal across the whole of the Catholic Church. So, for example, the Catholic Church, many of you will know this, but some of you may not know this, but the Catholic Church is actually a grouping of about 27, 28 different churches. And the one thing they have in common, really, is that we all look to the Pope as our leader. The Catholic Church that we experience here, generally, in Australia, most of us, is what we would call the Western Catholic Church or the Latin Catholic Church, not because we speak Latin, but because of our origins. And in the Latin Catholic Church, which is by far the biggest around the world, priests aren't allowed to get married and bishops aren't allowed to get married. In the other Catholic churches, and there may be people here who belong to some of these churches, like the Ukrainian Catholic Church, the Melkite Catholic Church, the Maronite Catholic Church, the Chaldean Catholic Church, there's a whole lot of them. In most of those traditions, their priests are allowed to marry, but their bishops aren't. And in fact, here at Arranmore College, one of the chaplains to the college, Father Elias, belongs to one of those Eastern Catholic churches, and he's married and has a family. So it's a tradition that's very strong in the Catholic experience. It's not universal. You make a very good point when you raise the question, if God wants us to have children, then why does the church stop its priests and bishops from getting married and having a family? The first thing to say is that you're absolutely right. God wants us to be open to families, obviously. And most people, the vast majority of people, God is calling to do exactly that. And it goes right back to the very beginnings of our tradition in the Bible. So when you read the first couple of chapters of the book of Genesis, some of you will have studied the book of Genesis probably in your RE classes, you might know that in the first chapters of Genesis, there are two creation stories. So written at two quite different periods in history, but both thousands of years ago. But in both of them, the point is made that God has made men and women for each other, and that when they grow up and they get married and have a family, that's fulfilling God's plan. And not only is it fulfilling his plan, but it's the way in which we do what God created us to do and to be, and that is people who live in his image. You might remember the first creation story. And in that story, the writer starts off by saying, in the beginning, the earth was a formless void and the Spirit hovered over the waters, and then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then God said, let there be something else, and there it was, and let there be something else. And there's this great long list of things that God made. And the very last thing God made in that version of the story was humanity. So he made human beings, and we're told there that he made them in God's image. Now you've got to read that line in the light of everything that's come before. And what's come before? This long, long story about God as a God who creates things, who makes things, who gives life. So human beings are created in the image of a God who gives life, a God who's life-giving and creative. And one of the best ways for human beings to live in God's image is by being life-giving and creative, and that's what happens when people marry and have a family. So that's a key to our understanding of God's plan for us, and that's why the vast majority of you probably will eventually get married and have families, and in doing that, you'll be living out your vocation to be images of God, the life-giver. So that even makes it even stranger why the church won't allow its priests and bishops to get married. There are two reasons for it, I think. One's practical, and the other's a bit more spiritual. The practical reason is that the life of a priest or a bishop, now I don't want to say this to sound like I'm feeling sorry for myself, but the life of a priest or a bishop is a very demanding life. And people expect a lot from their priests and their bishops. Our experience in the Catholic Church is it's very hard to respond to all the demands of our people and be able also to be a faithful husband and a good father, because it's both of those things need a full-time commitment. And if you're going to commit yourself to one, it kind of excludes committing yourself to the other. Now, that's not a universal experience, and those of you who belong to other Christian traditions might know that in your traditions, your priests or pastors or ministers do get married. But in our Catholic experience, we believe that if the priest or the bishop isn't married, it means that he's, in theory, if he's not selfish, in theory, he's much more available to meet all the needs of the people who come to him. So that's the kind of practical reason. The other reason is a bit harder to grasp, maybe, but I mean, you would all know this, your parents would all know this, your teachers would all know this. Being married, just living, a normal life, having a job when you eventually leave school, having a job, looking after a family, all of that, it's pretty all-consuming. And because it's so all-consuming, it's actually easy, and I suspect many of you might experience this in your own lives, it's actually easy to forget about God. You're so busy with so many other things, and life seems to just be crowding in on you all the time, but because God's not sort of in your face all the time, it's easy for God to drift away. We need people who remind us of the importance of God. Not because they're any better than anyone else or God's only important to them, but God calls some people and asks them to make this sacrifice and not get married and have a family so that they can kind of be an obvious reminder to the rest of us that actually God does matter. It's important to have room in my life for God. So it's kind of like it's someone who's kind of put there to be a bit of a thorn in our side in a way, or a reminder to us not to forget God. And one of the best ways to do that is to have people who make the God thing the very centre of their lives in a very obvious way, because that then reminds us that God's supposed to be a part of our lives as well. So does that kind of... It's not a complete answer, but it's certainly the way I understand it. Yeah.
My name is Adrian, and I'm also from Mercy College, and my question is to Archbishop Costello. What does your average day in the position of an archbishop consist of?
That's a great question. My first response would be to say, and everyone will understand this, there's no average day. I don't do this every day, for example. But let me give you a bit of a rundown of what might look like a typical day for me as the Archbishop. So I would get up about 6 o'clock. If I don't have Mass somewhere, if I'm not saying Mass in a parish or something, or coming out to a school for Mass or something like that, I've got a little chapel at home, and I would celebrate Mass at home and say some prayers at home because, as I was saying earlier in my talk, that second piece of advice of Mary MacKillop's, never forget who you're following, that's really important for someone like a bishop or a priest, or for all of us, of course. So that's start to the day where I might celebrate Mass or sit quietly in my chapel and say some prayers. Then I'd have breakfast, either a couple of slices of toast or a bowl of sultana bran or something like that, in case you're interested. And then normally, if I didn't have any particular function to go to, I would go into the office. The Archbishop's office is in Adelaide Terrace in the city, and I would go there. Normally I'd get there and I'd sit down with my executive secretary, and she would go through the mail that came in the day before. We would talk about letters that I would need to respond to, letters that she might draft a response for me. So we'd do that sort of thing. Often I would then have some meetings. Once a week, for example, Bishop Don and I, together with two of our priests, every Wednesday morning, we get together for 2 or 3 hours for a meeting to discuss what's going on in the diocese and what the challenges might be, what's coming up, those sorts of things. One of the things a bishop has to do is to decide which priests are going to be appointed to which parish. So that's often a discussion for us, Father X has been in parish Y for 6 years and he's looking for a move, so we might move him to
some other parish, but if we do that, we've got to ask that priest to move somewhere else, and if we do that, that priest has got to move somewhere else. So we're constantly talking about those kinds of things. Many people would want to come and see me for different reasons. People who run our agencies, for example. So the director of the Emmaus community or Shopfront or somebody might want to come and see me. What else do I do? Let me think. Well, for example, I had to spend a few hours putting today's talk together. So often I'll spend some time preparing a talk or a homily that I've got to preach at the cathedral the following Sunday or something like that. Bishops also, as well as our responsibilities, so Bishop Don and I have responsibility for the Archdiocese of Perth, but we both also have responsibilities at the level of the church Australia-wide. So one of my responsibilities at the moment is to be in charge of the Bishops' Commission for Catholic Education. So I often have meetings to do with education at the national level. Sometimes the meetings are here in Perth, sometimes they're in Sydney. Bishop Don and I are getting on a plane on Wednesday, tomorrow, to go to Sydney for a week of meetings with all the other Australian bishops. Often I'll be going out to a school. Most of the schools that are here this morning I've visited since I've been the Archbishop. I might go out just to meet the staff and have morning tea with them. I might go out because, you know, it's the Silver Jubilee of the school coming up and I have to go out and not have to, and want to go out and celebrate with them. I sometimes go out for the opening Mass of a school year or the closing Mass of a school year. Sometimes I give in-services to teachers and school principals and those kinds of things. What else do I do? We have 2 seminaries here in Perth, places where young men training to be priests. I'll go out there every so often to meet with them. So that just gives you a bit of an idea. And then sometimes it's very important for me to keep up with what Richmond is doing, so I also have to do that from time to time as well.
Archbishop, I'm interested in that national role with the Commission. How do our schools compare to schools around the rest of the, other Catholic schools and colleges around the rest of the country? How are we placed as a school system? What's happening in that space that might be interesting to share?
I have to be careful here because as the Archbishop of Perth, I'm bound to say that our schools are streets ahead of everybody else. But as the chair of the Bishops' Commission for Catholic Education across Australia, I'm not allowed to say that. So you can work out which is true. Look, we have a fantastic Catholic education system here in WA. We're a little bit unique. I don't want to get too technical, but Western Australia is a big state. And we only have one Catholic education office for the whole of Western Australia. When I was an auxiliary bishop in Melbourne, Victoria is a much smaller state, but there are 4 separate Catholic education offices. And so the responsibilities of the Catholic Education Office here in Western Australia are very extensive compared to most other states. And so, and you would know, Ed, that it's one thing to be looking at the schools in the Archdiocese, and all of you are from the Archdiocese, but our Catholic Education Office is also responsible for remote schools up in the Kimberley, for schools down in the Bunbury Diocese, for schools in the far-flung parts of Geraldton Diocese. So it's quite an extensive and a very complex operation, and I think we do it very well. My only experience is here and in Victoria, and I don't want to make comparisons, but I would say that one of the things that always strikes me when I go out to particularly our secondary schools here in WA, in our Archdiocese anyway, and particularly when I meet the senior leaders. Now, most of you aren't in Year 12 because most of the Year 12 people are caught up in other things. But I'm constantly impressed, is almost too weak a word, for the sense of, I suppose it's pride, but also amazement in a sense, the quality of the young people who attend to our schools. So I think that's a testament to you, it's a testament to your families, it's also a testament to our schools and what we're able to achieve. So Catholic education is the biggest enterprise in which the Catholic Church is involved here in Western Australia, as indeed it is in Australia worldwide. We're also heavily involved, as most of you would know, in healthcare, and the Catholic Church is one of the biggest providers of healthcare in Australia, as it is aged care and social outreach. So there's a lot for us to be proud of, but Catholic education is by far the biggest enterprise of the Church here in Australia. And I think we do it well. So, and seeing all of you here just confirms that in my mind. So, does that kind of answer the question a bit? Yeah, thanks.
My name's Michelle and I'm from Mud Day, and this is for all of you. I'd like to know what are your biggest challenges that you face within your role and how you're attempting to overcome them.
I'm going to jump straight in there, Michelle. Thank you for that question. I've got 2 little young children at home, and one of my challenges is getting to work in the morning without sick on this shoulder from my little baby Harry, and without things that Alfie's thrown at me from the breakfast table. Look, I'm in a really fortunate role in an amazing system, as the Archbishop has alluded to, but there are challenges. And the key challenge is making sure that the 80,000 students in Catholic education are receiving the best possible education every day. And we're so lucky to have extraordinary staff in schools delivering those opportunities. But the reality is, whatever was being taught last year probably shouldn't be being taught in a year's time. And we need to find ways to make sure that students are really engaged, excited in what they're learning about, and are given opportunities which will set you all up for the lives that you will live into the future. Because that life is changing, and the world that you will move into after you leave school is going to be very different from the world that your mums and dads are in right now. We know jobs will look very different. We know that society will look very different. We know that technology will have an impact that we're not really quite sure what it will look and sound like right now. So one of the key challenges for all the staff in Catholic education is to continually focus on how we provide the best possible education, and within that context to ensure that Catholic and our faith and the notion of spirituality is available and at the centre of all that we do. So we're not just a good or successful government school, and we're not just a good or successful independent school. We have a good and successful Catholic system of schools, and we need to keep working as hard as possible to solve the challenges which might prevent us from delivering that into the future. So I have a great role. It's a problem-solving role, and one that is both exciting and challenging, but one that I'm very blessed to be in.
The a couple of the works that I'm involved in the diocese are first of all the ministry to young people in the diocese. So I work with our Catholic Youth Ministry and Anita Parker and her team. And I think that's certainly a very, very important, a very significant work in the diocese of how do we make it possible for young people to grow in their faith, particularly as they move out of secondary education into tertiary or into work, how to enable them to find a place to belong. And that's really the work of the parish. And that would be the second work. I'm the vicar for, sort of like evangelisation, but it's parish renewal and adult faith formation. So the challenge there is to make our parishes places where people want to belong and want to be, because they see their relevance, or the relevance of belonging somewhere, because you need to be with others in order to really live your faith. Parishes also have a missionary dimension to them. So many of the things that we've been talking about already this morning, the works that are done through LifeLink, these are things that parishes are engaged in doing too, and we're trying to encourage them to reach out more towards the general community, because people at large, I think, are in need of seeing a witness of faith. The witness of faith is most strongly given, I think, when people are doing good works. And in fact, that comes out of our scriptures. You know, if you say you've got faith, well, show me how you're putting that faith into action. And so that's probably one of the most important things that we're trying to do now in revitalising our parish communities. So people will say, this is a place where I want to be because of what they do and who they are. And as the Archbishop was saying in the talk that he gave, in order to be who we're meant to be, we need to keep our gaze fixed on Jesus, okay, and be Jesus people in the community. And that's really what our parishes are meant to be. So I'd say at the moment, these are the two big challenges that I'm facing. They're not small challenges, but there's a lot of people there working with me who are really committed to making a difference to both of those works.
I think in the very first question that we had this morning, I was talking about the challenge of holding together the high ideals and the reality. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges the Church is facing today, and certainly for me as the Archbishop, I think about this a lot and I reflect on this a lot and I talk about it a lot. Even this morning when I was talking about Mary MacKillop, you know, she's someone who lived according to these very high ideals, and she's one of those people who holds up these very high ideals to us. But we're living in a period in history where so many people who are part of the life of the Church have failed miserably to live up to those high ideals. Many of you would be aware, I'm sure, of the terrible scandal and tragedy of the whole sexual abuse of children and young people that the Church has been caught up in. And dealing with that, I would say, in the 5 years that I've been Archbishop here in Perth, has been and probably continues to be the biggest challenge for me. Because on the one hand, it's my role and Bishop Don's role and any of us who are leaders in the Church to constantly be holding up these high ideals and inviting people and encouraging people to try and reach them. And yet we're also very vulnerable in a sense because people can throw back at us, and quite rightly, we hold up these high ideals, but look at your story, look at your history. Even the leaders haven't been able to live up to them. So how can you be offering these high ideals to us? So I think there's a real challenge for the Church, everyone who's a part of the Church, but especially its leaders in dealing with this shocking situation where so many, when I say so many, a significant number of those who should have been the leaders and should have been the ones who more than anybody else showed in their lives what being a Christian was all about, failed us so badly with enormous damage done to so many people. And then certainly for me as a bishop to have to acknowledge this is a challenge too, that some of our leaders, particularly in the past and in the quite recent past, just didn't know how to respond to this or responded to it very badly. So the challenge for us, I think, is to recognise that Christianity, which ultimately, as Bishop Don just said, comes down to the person and the teachings and the example and the presence of Jesus Christ in our lives, it's such a good message. It's such a life-giving message. But people in our church, including our leaders, have made it so much harder to get that message across because we look like hypocrites. We're talking about these wonderful things and we haven't always lived up to them. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. How do you stop yourself getting completely discouraged and you know, writing to the Pope and saying, "Dear Holy Father, I've had enough of this, I'm out of here"? How do you stop yourself giving up? How do you keep going? How do you hang on to the ideals, but also live with the reality and be determined to do something to change it, to make sure that the way we experience the church today and the way we experience the church in the future is going to be and has to be and needs to be very different to the way some people experience it in the past. So for me as the Archbishop, because in the end, you know, in one sense it falls to me, but I'm very lucky I've got heaps of people around me to help me. For me as the Archbishop, dealing with this is a challenge that I never in a million years when I was a young person would have imagined. When I thought I wanted to be a priest, it never would have occurred to me in a million years that as a priest, well, I never thought I'd be a bishop anyway, but as a priest and now as a bishop, that I have to deal with this terrible reality. So that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges. And in talking about it, I'm conscious that it's not just a challenge for me or Bishop Don or Dr. Simons. It's a challenge for anybody who cares about the church. Because if you care about the church, this has to break your heart. And sometimes having your heart broken is not such a bad thing because it can give you that impetus to make sure that no one else's heart gets broken in the future. So I know that's pretty serious stuff, but that is one of the biggest challenges that I face as a bishop, I think.
My name is John Topless and I'm from Holy Cross College in Ellenbrook, and my question is to Archbishop Costello. We live in a society today that's continually changing ideologies and theories. So my question is, how do we continue to profess the message of Jesus and our message as Christians in a society that no longer accepts religion?
That would have to be, in a sense, having just talked about the challenge that we're facing with the sexual abuse crisis, in a sense this is almost an equally big challenge. Can I answer it by just putting it this way to start off with? I'm 63. I know I look much younger, but I'm 63. When I was a kid growing up in the 60s in Melbourne, I come from what I would call, in the best sense of the word, a good average Catholic family. We weren't fanatics. We went to Mass every Sunday, my brother and myself and Mum and Dad. But we weren't the kinds of people who, I should be embarrassed to say this, but I'm not actually. We didn't say the rosary every night at home. We were just average Catholics. But with the traditional Catholic values that everybody grew up with in those days. I went to what I would describe, again in the best sense of the word, as a good average Catholic primary school and a good average Catholic secondary school. When I was growing up in the 60s and going to school in the 60s, and I finished Year 12 in 1971, so I can say that the values that Mum and Dad were teaching us at home were the same as the values that I was being taught in primary school and in secondary school. And hopefully that would be the same for many of you, that the values that you're picking up at home from Mum and Dad are pretty much the same kinds of values that are being promoted and hopefully communicated to you both when you're in primary school and now that you're in secondary school. But here's the difference. In the 60s when I was growing up, the values in home and school were almost identical with the values of the society in which we lived. And so there was a kind of a coherence between the three. I think that's changing, and that's probably my way of saying exactly what you've just been saying. I think we have to recognise that many of the values which are kind of in the air that we breathe today aren't easily reconciled with traditional Christian values. So that makes faith and religion and all of those things much harder for you people, I think, than it would have been for me. Because there wasn't a contradiction. I wasn't kind of being bombarded, from other parts of my life with values that were different from what Mum and Dad were on about or what school was on about. So that's just sort of setting the scene. Now, how do we deal with that? There are a whole lot of things we need to do, but I think there are two things we need to do. We need, and this is something that we do as individuals, but as individuals who belong to faith communities, we need to make sure that we really do understand the traditional Christian values and what they're based on and what they're trying to preserve. And I'm not sure that we all do, whether we're bishops or priests or married people or young people at school or teachers or whoever. I'm not sure that we do understand them all that well, because as I say, we live in a society where if you can think of values as the air that you breathe, you can't help but breathe in the air. If any of us in here stopped breathing, we'd fall down dead on the floor. You can't help breathing in the atmosphere in which you live. So we're breathing in an atmosphere that, according to traditional Christian values, might be a bit unhealthy for us. So we need to be sure we understand what the Christian values are and what they're founded on and what they're trying to preserve. But we also need to understand, as you indicated, that we live in a different world. The world of 2017 is very different to the world of 1965. And the language that we use and the way we understand life has changed. So the big challenge for the church, and we're still working our way through it, and it's not an easy thing to do, is to make sure we really understand the values and then see how can we find a new way of talking about these values, the things that we believe are going to really contribute to a fully lived human life. How can we find a way of talking about them in the contemporary world so that people will understand them? So to use an extreme example, if I was sitting up here now and was giving you a response to your question in the most eloquent and brilliant way possible, but I was doing it in Mandarin, there wouldn't be too many people here who would understand me. One of the questions the church has to ask itself is our language today capable of being understood by the people of our time, or do we need to find a new language to communicate the same beliefs? That's the challenge. So I haven't given you the answer, I've just posed the question in another way, but that's the challenge. But I think to recognise the problem's important, that our society is no longer as anchored as it was to traditional Christian values. Now, some people will think that's a good thing, some people will think it's not a good thing. I think it's the reality, however you evaluate it, and the church has to learn to live with that reality. So it's a challenge and a project that the church has to engage with, and we won't come up with an immediate answer. We just have to keep looking and have to keep trying.
I'm Ella and I'm from Sacred Heart College. And my question to all three of you is, in your opinion, what's the best piece of advice you could give to young people who really want to live what was talked about earlier, which is opening our eyes and our ears and our hearts to others and their needs?
I think the key is to go back to the Gospels and to understand what Jesus was about. I've just come back from a pilgrimage to Israel, and I went with a group of teachers from our schools, and it's been a wonderful experience for me because you go to the places where Jesus was and where he ministered, where he started his work, where the work of the church in effect began. You go to those places where he was, you listen again to what he was trying to communicate to people about a way of life that was able to bring a great deal of freedom to them individually, but also to the people that they met along the way. And that sort of helped me then to look at the Gospels in a completely new way and to understand better what Jesus was saying and how what he was saying has the potential to transform our hearts. So I think for me, to begin there, to understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, and then to be aware of that power and strength that he gives us once we come to know him, once we come to trust and believe in him. He then gives us that spirit that enables us then to really have our hearts transformed. And that transformation means that you you then begin to move away from your own concerns and your own needs, and you begin to see the others around you. And I think that's when because of this transformation of heart, that you then develop these new ways of looking at your own situation and the situations of other people around you. And you grow in a sense of compassion for them. So, to me, that's where it begins. That's how it starts. And what I found in this pilgrimage was I'd been given the opportunity to go back to a time when that was happening to me as a young person, and it sort of renewed within me that sense of opening my eyes and my hearts to my heart to other people. So does that help? Yeah.
I concur, entirely with Bishop Don. I think we're fortunate. I think you're fortunate as students in Catholic education, and I'm fortunate as an employee of Catholic education, because I think we have more time and space in our lives at school and in our work to find space for Jesus and for our faith, and to explore it, and perhaps to test it, and to acknowledge the ebb and flow of our faith. And that's probably not the case for many other people in society. So we're in a fortunate space. On earth right now, we have this most extraordinary model to learn from and to follow, and that's Pope Francis, who I have a photo of him behind me in my office, and it's a wonderful image taken when he was in South America, and he has a lamb over his shoulders, and it calls to his words when he said we should take on the smell of the sheep. We should be of the people. Now, all well and good me saying that, dressed in a suit and a tie and sitting on a stage, but I think what he is speaking to as the most powerful man in the Catholic faith is that we should never lose sight of our roots and our origins, and of the vulnerable and of the disadvantaged, and we should be of them and be with them as much as is possible. And that coming from a man who arguably, through a result of his position, is furthest away. So, goodness me, I posted on my Twitter account a TED Talk which he launched a week or so ago. It's 14 minutes or 17 minutes, however long a TED Talk should be, and there are some extraordinary words which he shares on that. So I'd encourage you not to look at my Twitter account, but to look at Pope Francis's recent TED Talk, which is wonderful.
I might just add a couple of thoughts. Before I became a bishop, I was teaching theology in Melbourne, teaching young men who were training to be priests and lots of other people, often people who were going to work in Catholic schools who wanted to deepen their understanding of their faith. One of the courses I taught was simply called An Introduction to Theology. And in the first lecture, so we're talking about people between the ages usually of about early 20s up, maybe into their 30s, 40s or 50s, many of them. In the first lecture, I'd always give them some homework, which they didn't like because it made them think they were back in school. But I'd tell them that for their homework, they had to wait until it was a cloudless night, and then they had to go out into the backyard and lie on their backs and just stare up into the sky and think about the immensity of the universe. Just to think about that extraordinary, almost ungraspable extent of what we call creation. I mention that because I think that, sort of in response to your question, one of the things that can help us to develop the eyes and the ears and the heart that I'm talking about is, first of all, to allow ourselves to develop a sense of wonder. You know, not just curiosity, but wonder about just the extraordinary immensity of the created universe. And for those of us who are Christians, those of us who believe in God, to think that when you look up and every one of those stars, represents however many billions of light years away, whatever they are, the numbers are just beyond me, that what we're seeing from our vantage point is the tiniest fraction of the extent of the universe. And yet the universe is just, in a sense, insignificant in relationship to the greatness of God. So to allow ourselves to be almost overpowered, almost overwhelmed by this mystery of God. And then for us as Christians, to allow ourselves to reflect on what our Christian tradition teaches us, and that is that this extraordinary reality that we call God, who is so beyond us, decided to, if I could put it this way, introduce himself to us by becoming one of us. So that all of a sudden this extraordinary mystery of God becomes graspable and touchable and understandable and contactable because God became one of us, and that person is Jesus. And I think as we allow that kind of sense to grow in us, and we allow ourselves to do what Bishop Don was just saying, which is to go back to the Gospels and get to know this man and understand what he was on about and understand what he was saying and look at the things he did and realise that what we're seeing there is God made known to us in a way that we can understand, then you begin to be captured by this mystery of God. Until you're captured by the mystery of God in one way or another and by the mystery of Jesus, I don't think the eyes and the ears and the heart that I'm talking about will ever fully develop. So I think, particularly for people at your age, I think you're right at the time when, if you wanted to, you could allow yourselves to be drawn into the mystery of life and the mystery of the universe and the mystery of a creator God and the mystery of this God becoming accessible to us in Jesus. And once that starts to grip you, I don't think it will ever let you go. Then what I said in my talk about never forgetting who it is that we follow will begin to make sense. So we're not just interested in this fascinating figure who lived 2,000 years ago, but in this man who died, who rose again. Who could believe that? What nonsense is that? But that's what we believe, that he came to life again through the power of God, that he's still alive today, he's accessible to us through the life of our church. This is an extraordinary mystery. And if we allow ourselves to be caught by the mystery, to wonder about this fantastic thing that's the gift of our faith, then I think that can provide a foundation for our lives. And I think that's why Mary MacKillop put those two things together. She knew that a decent human being will always be someone who never sees a need without doing something about it. But she always also realised that to be like that all the time, you're going to need more than just your own inner resources. You're going to need something else, and that something else is the grace and power of Jesus at work in your life. So I think it's all connected together. That's why I get excited about my faith and about the role that I have, and you know, I just think it's a fantastic thing to have at the heart of your life. So,
my name's Will Dundas and I'm from Aquinas College. We're currently learning in RE about vocation. I was just wondering, what's the best way for us to understand what our vocation really is?
Well, I'll have a go, and then the others might want to have a go, because of course a vocation is something that every person has. Are you meaning more specifically a vocation to be a priest or a brother, or just generally? Generally, okay. Look, I don't think it's disconnected with what I was just saying. I can reflect on my own experience of how I discerned that God wanted me to be a priest, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I think I came to an understanding. I first thought about it when I was in grade 6. So when I was your age, I was sort of going off the idea and on the idea and off the idea and on the idea. And I imagine many of you are in the same position in terms of thinking about your career choices or how you see your life working out in the future. Not sure, but gradually groping your way forward. to what you think is the best pathway for you to take. This sounds a bit airy-fairy, but it's the best I can do in a sense. I just gradually came to the conviction that if I was going to be the person I was meant to be, I needed to do this. Now, for me, it was join a religious order and become a priest. That won't be the majority of people. The majority of people will think the last thing I want to do is join a religious order and become a priest. But each one of us, I think, will gradually grow in that understanding that if I'm going to be the person that I'm meant to be, in religious terms we'd say the person that God created me to be, I need to do, and that will gradually become clearer. It's partly about getting to know yourself, understanding yourself at a deeper level. What are the things that really matter to you? What are the dreams that you have? What are the hopes you carry deepest in yourself? And then working out now, how am I going to be able to make those dreams a reality? So I think the question of a vocation, even the question of a career, in many ways they're both in their own way a question about what kind of person do I want to be? Not so much what do I want to do, but what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to grow into? And what do I need to do now to make sure I stay on that path of heading in the right direction? That it's probably the best I can do in one sense. It's reflecting my own experience. It's so much more than just picking a career or picking the job that's going to make me the most money or whatever. It's about being in touch with yourself at the deepest level and saying, who do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? So that's just the beginnings of an answer anyway.
One way to pose the question is what would success look like? How would you know that you'd lived a happy and full life, as you take your last breath, in your final moments? My parents are teachers, and being brought up in a household of chalkies, as we call them over here in Australia, if there's one thing I wanted to be, it was not going to be a teacher. Goodness me. All we spoke about was students and staff meetings and what was going on in their school lives. But for one reason or another, despite trying my hardest to get away from education, it was within me. And after unsuccessful attempts to work in other areas of work and career, I'm absolutely in and of education, and it comes from the heart. If there's one thing I would say, and I'm sure it's the case in many of your families and friends and extended networks, whatever you do, I would hope that you don't judge the success or the success of your life in terms of monetary achievement. I think we'd all know rich friends who are very unhappy people. So I'm not answering as eloquently as the Archbishop, but what I would say is be clear what success would look like for you in your life. In my life, that is being content as opposed to being happy, which I think is a temporary medium. It is about surrounding myself with wonderful people, both in my workplace and in my family and friend network. And it's about exploring my life through faith and through other mechanisms, having fun, having time to have fun, but hopefully not taking it too seriously. I think we're at any stage of our lives, we're able to ask ourselves, where am I now and where do I hope to be into the future? And there's nothing wrong with trying from the ages that you are in the room now, beginning to map out what that might look like. Less so through a career or a skill set, or a job title, but more of the areas that the Archbishop has spoken to. That was pretty poor, wasn't it?
The call to be a priest in my case sort of seemed to all come together in the last year that I was at high school. And a bit like the Archbishop, it was an idea that I had towards the end of primary. Wasn't specifically to be a priest, but to be somehow called to be someone who would do something for people in the church. At one stage I was thinking about being a brother and teaching and that in that way, And then when I got into high school, that sort of all disappeared, and then the focus went into other things. And so I was preparing so that when I finished high school, I could then go to university and start my studies in architecture. So it was something that I thought was going to be the thing that, in a sense, defined my life as an architect. And then in that last year at school, it all seemed to change on a retreat that we had. This idea of priesthood started to come into my mind, and it was an idea that wouldn't leave. And about 6 months later, I found myself in a seminary. So it was something that mystified me, and but I think in terms of what's been said by the Archbishop and by Dr. Simons already, I've come to understand something of the way that God gently invites you to see a path for your life that is actually going to be as fulfilling as it can possibly be, and it can surprise you as to what that path might be, but it's something that is an invitation. It's something that requires you to make a response to, and I'm just grateful that I had that, I suppose, the grace or the Holy Spirit was working in my life at that moment that said, okay, I'll give it a go and see whether this is going to be the path that's going to lead me to that sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, where my life has meaning and where I can make a contribution to the world at large through that vocation that God has called me to. And it could well have been in marriage, but I felt, no, this was a call to be a priest, which meant that I would need him to say, okay, if you go this way, you test it, you test your vocation by going to the seminary and going through those years of formation. Will you be able to trust that I will give you what you need then to be faithful to that call later on? So, yeah.
And just to finish my point, to try to clean it up, I hope for a moment I wasn't suggesting that education. I would hugely encourage anyone in this room to go into education and to teach. I had a wonderful time in the classroom. One of the best elements of working in education, as I'm sure it is in other industries and sectors as well, is that even on those tough days, and I'm sure your teachers and principals and others would agree with this, even on those tough days when it's all gone wrong, you know that deep down you've been trying to do something which will help, improve, assist, guide people, and typically young people through their own lives and try to improve their lives. And that sense of giving back perhaps isn't as evident in other industries, in other sectors. So I would certainly encourage you all to look at how your careers, from a 9 till 5 or whatever the working hours are, how they are giving back to society and making it a better place.
My name's Alana, and I'm from Santa Maria College, and my question is, in religion we usually come across between science and RE, so what is your view in life of how we can make room for RE and science?
Deafening silence. I think, from my point of view, there should never be any contradiction between science and religion. In fact, things that I read of Christians who are scientists sort of validates that idea for me. They understand, as the Archbishop was explaining, the wonder that there is about the creation. And yet they see the challenge to try and work out, how does this all work? And that's the work of the scientist, to discover how does it work. And then in astronomy and all that sort of thing, they're discovering that the laws that govern the way things work here on Earth seem to be working elsewhere too. So there's that other aspect of this mystery, that there's there's a universality, if you like. There's a universal law that governs all of creation. And that then makes you think, well, how can that be? So for them, it's about wonder. You know, they look at the universe with wonder, and but they're doing their best to try and help us understand how it actually all works. Yeah. So there's no contradiction, in my opinion.
I would just agree with that and add to it. The other day I was out at Notre Dame University giving a talk or a lecture to the first and second year medical students. And this is an issue that came up, and we kind of investigated together the notion of truth. And one of the things about truth, and any of you who might be doing philosophy or might be thinking of doing philosophy later on at school or later when you go to uni, will understand that there's a principle about truth can't be self-contradictory. So if a thing is true, really, if it's true, the very exact opposite can't be true. And the example I used is such a banal one, but I said, look, I was born in a hospital in East Melbourne in 1954, and that very fact made it absolutely impossible for me to be born at the Mount Lawley Hospital in 1963. They can't contradict each other. So I think it's a philosophical question, but truth can't be contradictory, and it's what Bishop Don is saying. There is, in fact, there can't be a contradiction between a truth that is determined, if you like, through faith and a truth that's determined through science. But what happens is we sometimes misunderstand the nature of the scientific truth, or we sometimes misunderstand the nature of the religious truth. So I was talking earlier about the book of Genesis. And the Genesis has two creation stories. They're quite different to each other. They can't both possibly be true, because one talks about human beings as the last thing God made after all the animals, and the other talks about human beings as the first thing God made and then all the animals. Well, they can't both be true. Until you look more deeply into it and you say, actually, the book of Genesis is a religious book. It's not a science textbook. If you want science, go to the science textbook. If you want religious truth, go to the religious book. It's when we confuse the categories that we can sometimes go astray. So I think even when it appears that there's a contradiction, I think you can rest secure in the fact that if science comes up with something which is incontrovertibly true, then there is nothing in religion that could contradict it, and nothing that in religion that can be threatened by it. So they're different categories, mutually enriching but separate. So I think that's an important principle to keep in mind.
Different categories. I was down staying on a farm over the Easter holidays, and one night went out with my young family, and we lay on some old mattresses with the people that we were with, and stared up at the stars, at the amazing stars, and that experience for me was deeply spiritual. It wasn't deeply scientific, and I accept that someone may have looked at that through a different lens and come up with a different answer, but that's how I would reflect on that.
Thank you very much. I'd like you to join me in thanking Archbishop Timothy, Bishop Don and Dr. Simons for allowing us to quiz them in that manner and their open and full answers. So thank you all.